Good afternoon. It is noon on the East Coast. It is 9 a.m. on the West Coast. I am Jeff Timmer. This is Lunch with Lincoln. And joining me today is documentarian filmmaker Marshall Curry. Marshall is an Academy Award winning filmmaker who's written and directed both fiction and documentary films. He won the Oscar for The Neighbor's Window, a short narrative film that he wrote and directed. He was previously nominated 3 times for Academy Awards for his documentary films Street Fight, If a Tree Falls, A Story of the Earth's Liberation Front, and A Night at the Garden. He also directed the award-winning documentaries Racing Dreams and Point and Shoot, and was the executive producer of Mistaken for Strangers. His work has won top awards at Sundance, Tribeca, and played on television around the world. His writing has twice been nominated for Writers Guild of America awards. He lives in Brooklyn with his wife and children. Marshall, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you.
Yeah. Well, I was absolutely fascinated by the Night at the Garden film. So why don't you kind of set that up and tell us, a bit about it so that our audience will go out and find this and watch it themselves. And it's a relatively short film, but it's really
Yeah.
powerful. And I'd love for you to tell them where it is and where they can view and watch it.
Sure. So it's a weird little film. Most of the documentaries that I've made have been feature-length documentaries and 90 minutes or 2 hours. And when it was nominated for an Oscar, I was told that it was the shortest film that had been nominated for an Oscar in like 50 years or something. So it's a 7-minute film. It's all archival footage. There's no professor comes in to explain what's going on. There's no voiceover. It just drops you into this event that I think most Americans have either never heard of, or if they've heard of it, have never witnessed. And that event was a Nazi rally that filled Madison Square Garden in 1939. So 20,000 Americans showed up to cheer for fascism in America. And there's a enormous portrait of George Washington with swastikas on either side of his head. And so the film is 7 minutes, and it just drops you into this event and shows you what was going on in America in certain parts of America at that time.
Well, yeah, 1939, right on the cusp of war in Europe. War is already raging in Asia and Japan and China. And so, there's this, I guess, romanticized notion that America was all, gung ho for the Allies, but there was that dark underbelly of American culture and political life that existed in 1939, much the way it does today.
Yeah, I do think that when people hear about this rally, they're shocked that something like that could happen in America, could have happened in America, because the story that I was brought up learning was that America beat the Nazis. We went to war, and that of course is true. But there was a long period where it wasn't clear what was going to happen. Wasn't clear whether we were going to join the war. There was a very strong group of people, politicians, cultural leaders, Henry Ford, Charles Lindbergh, William Randolph Hearst, media personalities like Father Coughlin, who were pushing hard for America first, was the sort of twisted phrase that they used, which is unfortunately has been resuscitated without apparently without understanding of what it meant historically. But and they didn't want to take on the Nazis, and in fact, lots of them were supportive of the fascist ideas that were being put forward. And in this rally, what's so striking about it is the echoes of today. The leader takes the stage, and he's funny and charismatic and mean-spirited, and he attacks the press for telling lies about him, and he thunders about the Jews who are taking over America, and that we need to defend against this minority religious group taking over America and being real Americans. And he wraps this ideology, which today we know is completely anti-American, but he wraps it in the American flag, and he wraps it in the Star Spangled Banner, and they recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and there's George Washington, and they've, to me, it is kind of a case study in how demagogues use the symbols of patriotism to subvert the what I consider the ideals of America.
Well, I don't think the America First reference is lost on those who started using it again this time. I think that symbolism, that the optics involved in what you describe, is our viewers are hearing that, they're, I'm sure, all thinking about the similarities between that and a MAGA rally, a Trump rally.
Mhm.
And I don't think that's lost on a lot of people who, I don't think they're out there thinking, okay, we're trying to recreate the Nazi party, but they recognize the power of propaganda, the power of production, the power of the symbolism and the jingoistic uh, 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 recitation of, like the Pledge of America, or the symbolism of the flag, and eagles flying around, all that kind
Right,
of thing.
right.
So tell us a little bit about how you go about. Okay, you hear first of all, what turned you on to this fairly obscure incident in American history. Like you say, a lot of people hadn't really heard of it. But then, so what turns you onto it? And then how do you go about finding this archival footage? Like, where is it archived?
Yeah. So I actually had never heard of the rally. I know a lot of people have heard about it in some ways, and there are references to it in the Plot Against America and places like that. Um, but I was having dinner with a friend of mine who's a screenwriter and was writing a screenplay that takes place in New York in 1939. And he said to me, "Did you know that there was a Nazi rally that filled Madison Square Garden that year?" And I just thought, there's no way that that could have happened, and I never heard of it. And so I went home that night and looked it up, and sure enough, he was right. I was wrong. And not only that, there were some short clips that were in some historical documentaries where they just show a few seconds of this rally. And I thought, wait a minute, if somebody brought a camera in and they've shot some footage, there's got to be more of it. And so I got an archival researcher, Rich Remsburg, who I knew and had worked with a little bit, and said, "Can you start looking around and see what you can turn up?" And it turned out that there were clips in the National Archive, and there were clips in Grinberg Archive and UCLA's archive, and so there were a number of places that had pieces of this event, but nobody had ever really put it together. And there were some places where we had film but no audio, and then other places had audio but no footage to go with it. And some of it had never been scanned in the National Archives. Some of it, they had film and low resolution scans of it, but it had never been scanned, high definition before. So I just started collecting screener versions of all this stuff and cut it together and shared it with Laura Poitras, who's a filmmaker friend who founded Field of Vision, which is a production company that focuses largely on short films. And she and Charlotte Cook saw what I'd done and thought, "Oh, this is something that we want to share with the world." So they were able to give me money that we were able to do high definition scans from the National Archive and really do some restoration work on some of the images, and put music to it and sound effects and things like that. And then we released it. So that was and when I first saw the footage, I thought that maybe I would make a more traditional historical documentary where you have people explaining the footage. And one day I was just sort of playing with it, and I thought, what if I just let this footage, if I edit the footage in a way that just drops the audience into this, and you don't know what it is, and there's no explanation, and what would that feel like to somebody to watch? And so I spent some time editing that, and I tested it on a couple of friends and said, "Take a look at this and see what you think." And there's something really powerful about, you see Madison Square Garden, and there's a hockey game, and out on the sign out front, and you recognize Madison Square Garden, and you go inside, and there's a crowd. the thing's called A Night at the Garden. You think, oh, maybe this is going to be about a boxing match and then you see, thousands and thousands of people filling the arena and American flags and George Washington, and you think, oh, maybe the sign outside said it was a pro-America rally, and so you think, oh, maybe this is just some typical patriotic rally, and then you notice that some of the people are holding swastikas and that they're Nazi signs around on the walls, and then then people start doing the Nazi salute, and then the speaker takes the stage and starts ranting about the Jews and about the press, and one of the really striking things that happened that night is that a Jewish plumber's assistant from Brooklyn, 20-something-year-old guy named Isidore Greenbaum, went to the rally that night to see what it was all about. And when he saw what was happening, he was so appalled that he ran out on stage. And so the cameras suddenly are jerking, as this guy runs out on stage to either get to the microphone or take a swing at the guy who's making the speech. It's not entirely clear what his goal was, but a group of stormtroopers just grab him and start punching him and beating him up, and they rip off his pants and throw him off stage. And it's a really frightening and powerful moment, and again, a moment that probably feels familiar to people who have seen footage of some of those MAGA rallies, where a mob of seemingly normal, decent Americans just gets whipped into a frenzy by a demagogue who, tells them to defend their country and defend their culture against outsiders. And that's kind of the experience of watching the film.
Clearly, it's a kind of a harbinger, or the parallels between then and now are clear. When you set off to make the film, did you intend it to be a warning, or did that just kind of evolve? Did you recognize the parallels as the project progressed?
As soon as I saw the footage, I was shocked by how modern it felt. Just down to the language that was used, the references to taking America back from these minorities who are threatening it, so that was always my intent. Now, there's no mention of Donald Trump in the film, and I did consider, and would this be interesting if we intercut it with footage from MAGA rallies? And in fact, I've encouraged people to kind of take the footage that I've found and do what they want with it. And there have been some people who have done that. But I really wanted to get past some of the walls, some of the filters that we put up when we have these political discussions. And I felt that by stripping any modern reference out of it and just showing people, hey, this is what happened in 1939 when a demagogue held rallies to attack people of minority religions, to attack the press, to beat up protesters, to use patriotic symbols to sell anti-American values. This is what happened in 1939, and maybe there's a subtle warning in that. And I wasn't sure if I needed to underline it a little bit more. I've been glad that I haven't, because it's just history. That's all it is. It has played in museums and it's played in schools, and so places where more explicitly political speech, sometimes people get afraid of getting involved. In this way, it was able to reach some people who might otherwise filter it out. And we know that with political conversations, people try to identify which tribe you're with, and then they decide whether to listen or not. And if you're telling them something that they believe, that if they sense that you're on our side, they'll listen to you. If they sense that you're on the other side, they'll block you out. And so by trying to strip away some of that, I hoped that I could get through some of the filters. Now, it was funny because when the movie was nominated for an Oscar, we decided that, there people put these ads, these for your consideration ads in Hollywood Reporter and Variety magazine and places like that. And we decided we would buy a 30-second for your consideration ad and put it on Sean Hannity's show. And so we got somebody to book this ad. And all the ad is it's just historical clips from the night. And then at the very end, it says, it can happen here. For your consideration, A Night at the Garden. And what happened, we thought, at the time, we thought, I really want Sean Hannity's viewers to just take a look at this event and think about this historical event and see if you see any connections between the person who was the president at that time and what was happening in 1939, and see if you see any connections between the things that Sean Hannity does and the things that Father Coughlin was doing in 1939. And but none of that was explicit. It was entirely archival footage and for your consideration. So we put that up, and just before it was going to air, the Washington Post did a story asking us, well, why did you buy this ad and run it on, it's sort of unusual for a short documentary to run an ad, and why did you want to put that on Sean Hannity's show? And so I explained that I think many of Sean Hannity's viewers are good people who are just getting bad information, and that they probably have the same values that I have, but they have been inundated with bad information. And so so what I want is for them to have an opportunity to see this piece of American history. And so the Washington Post ran that story, and the next day we got word that that Fox News had canceled our ad and had rejected our ad, which they had already accepted. And of course, they made a sort of a dumb error, which was that they told the booking company that booked the ad that the head of Fox News had personally interceded and to reject this ad, which of course turned it into a news story. And so the Washington Post and the NPR and the New York Times, and it became this story that NPR and Slate and Salon and Vox and everybody was writing these stories about what is it about this piece of American history that Fox News doesn't want its viewers to know about. And we ended up probably getting 100 times, 1,000 times more publicity for the film as a result of them trying to hide it from their viewers than we would have if they had just let their viewers watch the ad.
Well, yeah, that seems like you've experienced something similar to what we've had happen a lot with the Lincoln Project and in the political ads that we've produced. Sometimes they're just for an audience of one, and Trump would back when he had Twitter, or now with Truth Social, will go on and rage about these ads, which a lot of people wouldn't have necessarily seen, but suddenly everybody shifts their attention to,
Right.
and gives you a exponentially more eyeballs and attention on. So yeah, it's as a producer and a filmmaker, I'm sure you had to be thrilled at the publicity that generated.
I was, but then I have to say also, this movie came out a few years ago, and every 6 months, there's something that happens, and it blows up on Twitter, and we get thousands and thousands of new views. And there's the filmmaker side of me that's like, oh, that's cool. This thing I made is getting attention. And then there's the human American side of me that thinks, what the F? Like, how is this still relevant? Like, I will be so happy when a Nazi rally in 1939 seems like ancient history and has nothing to do with the politics of today. Like, the day that this work is irrelevant will be my happiest day. The fact that it continues to have resonance with people is heartbreaking, actually.
When you were going through the archival footage, did you come across any footage of like some recognizable figures, like a young Laura Ingraham or Judge Janine in the 1939 footage? That's a
There's
joke, by the way.
Yeah. Well, of course, a lot of people think that Donald Trump's dad could have been somewhere, if not at this rally nearby, because um, I think people know that the papers reported that he had been arrested at a in a brawl around a Klan rally that was
Mhm.
right around the same time. But no, we didn't recognize anybody. I realized that we should probably tell people how they can watch it. It's free and it's
Mhm.
online right now. So you can either go to a night at the garden.com, or if you just Google Madison Square Garden Nazi rally, that'll take you. It's on YouTube, it's on Vimeo, and we've sort of encouraged people to pirate it and share it, and are not. Uh, I'm not proprietary about it at all. In fact, I'm eager for this footage to become sort of like the footage of civil rights protesters getting hosed in the South during the civil rights movement. Footage that is a dark part of our history, but an important part of our history, and something that we need to study in order to make sure that things like this don't happen, or when they do happen, that we continue to push back on it.
Sure. Now, a documentarian is an observer. You've said that there's a balance in what you do between journalism, art, and storytelling. When you set out to do any project, do you approach it as a journalist, as an artist, as a storyteller? Does it matter?
Yeah.
How do you go about selecting these projects and then proceeding with them?
Yeah. I mean, I see documentary as all of those things. It's a bit like how in journalism you have straight news, you have editorials, you have political cartoons, and I think in documentaries there are different people whose work fits in differently to those. I have a pretty high, um, you know, being accurate is important to me. Being historically accurate is important to me. So I don't think anything goes. But I also don't. I don't think that you know balance in the traditional way, where if you have somebody who's against the Nazis, you have to invite somebody on who's pro-Nazi, or
Mm.
if you have somebody who says the Earth is round, you have to have somebody on who says the Earth is flat. And like that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for accuracy, and I'm looking um, for recognition of complexity. And when there's a story like this, I almost don't feel like you need to be heavy-handed. I feel like just sharing what happened with people is powerful enough. Now, in this case, one of the things I worried a little bit about when I was making the film is I didn't want it to become something that American Nazis would share as this great example of our history that they want to get back to. And the film, even though it's all archival footage, it does have a point of view built into it. So the music that I used, like I stripped out the sort of jaunty military music that they used when they marched in, and replaced it with sort of anxious, pensive, thoughtful music that was hoping to say, "Hey, pay attention to what's going on here. How do you feel about this?" And the moment when they beat up the protester and throw him off stage, I slowed that shot down because I really wanted you to see this person's face and to realize like this is a human being, and this is uh, uh, to empathize with the humanity of that person. And that had to be done by slowing it down frame by frame so that you could see the fear on his face as these people are just pummeling him. And there were a couple of other things. One of the things that's so striking to me about this event is how normal the audience looks. It's full of 20,000 people. I live in New York, and the people who filled the arena that night are not seemingly evil, bloodthirsty people. They are people who are like our neighbors, who put their kids to bed with a babysitter, and they put on a hat and a suit and a tie, and they went to a rally, and yet they were able to have the darkness in them amplified and pulled out. And there's a moment as they're beating up this guy where in the background you can see all these kids who are in these little scout, Nazi youth uniforms, and there's one little boy, and you can just see he's so excited by the chaos that's happening on the stage in front of him, and he kind of does this little jig, and I noticed him in the background. And so the shot that I use in the film, we zoom in on him, and make sure that you notice it, because to me his excitement is a cautionary tale to us about the thrill of being part of a mob and being part of a rally and seeing, some enemy getting attacked. All of that stuff, it is inside of us, and we really need to be careful to make sure that the demagogues that want to use that don't have access to it, and that there are people who are pushing back on that.
Well, it just struck me when you were saying, the people, they just look like they're out for a regular night, and they are. That's what's so shocking about when you think of the history of Germany in the 1930s and 40s, was just how perfectly mundane life was for most people involved in some of the most extraordinarily evil, atrocious things, and how it just became, it's just routine. We're gonna, got to get up and go work at the camp tomorrow. The people in the cities who were involved in the trains or whatever it is, they just dressed and went to work, and it was just a regular thing. And that's what makes this so striking. Is it's not like when it happens anywhere here or there that there's like some big fanfare in it. Okay, we are now a totalitarian state. Everybody it just happens.
Just a little piece at a time, isn't it?
Right. And it's kind of, the frog boiling in water or whatever analogy people want to use. And that's where we find ourselves. And people, like I've been told for the last 6-7 years that I'm being hyperbolic, Chicken Little, when I go out and say, this is wrong. This is not normal. We're normalizing the abnormal. But that's what your film, the Night at the Garden, shows is just how normal the abnormal was and can be. And that's where it becomes a cautionary tale.
Yeah, I one of the reasons that the Bund, which was the group that organized this rally and had camps all over, many camps around America where they trained kids and communities. One of the reasons that it didn't take off more than it did was because the leaders had German accents, and there was a German culture that was a part of it. And that's what's so scary about today, is that the people who are doing this, they speak American, they speak pop culture, they speak internet memes. They're very good at cutting through, to our culture. And there was a famous line that probably a number of people know, where Halford Lecoq said that, when and if fascism comes to America, it will not be labeled made in Germany. It won't be marked with a swastika. It won't even be called fascism. It will be called, of course, Americanism. And I just find that chilling, that was what people said so long ago. And now we see people today who are trying to implement that.
Well, filmmaker Marshall Curry, thank you for joining us. Thank you for discussing your film, A Night at the Garden. You have other works as well. Do you have a website where people can find your other works if they want to explore?
Sure. Yeah. So marshallcurry.com has that. And for some of one of my first films was Street Fight, which was about Cory Booker's first run for mayor of Newark. So for your political junkie fans, that's another one. But there are a number of films up there. And on Twitter it's at marshallcurry.com.
Well, again, thanks for joining us on Lunch with Lincoln. I'm Jeff Timmer. We're going to leave you today with a new ad by the Lincoln Project. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, Jeff.
Dear MAGA, we have some bad news. No, not that he lost. Not that your little coup attempt failed. and its planners and the attackers are going to jail. No, the really bad news is why Trump told you he lost. Why he set it up way before the 2020 election. It wasn't voter fraud, but it was fraud. Trump told you the election was stolen to rip you off, to sucker you, to take your hard-earned money and shovel it into his pockets. He spent it on himself, not to take back the White House. It was the biggest scam in political history. Every dollar you sent him paid to keep his shaky business empire and lavish lifestyle going. It was a sucker's game all along. And you know who the sucker is? It's you.